Hi everyone, it's Katrina. Today we are diving deep into the murky, sometimes scary depths of history. You know, the stuff they don't teach you in school. The kind of stories that'll make you question everything you thought you knew about the world. We are talking about the dark, the twisted, and the downright weird. Think secret documents, cannibal diseases, and unexplained phenomena. So grab your flashlight, settle in, and let's explore the forbidden side of history. Trust me, you won't regret it. The Thule Papyrus. The truth of ancient Egypt and their extraterrestrial friends is going to shock you. There's an ancient text written around 1480 BC that details a mass UFO sighting. It's one of the most convincing pieces of proof that aliens are real. 1480 BC places us right in the middle of the 18th dynasty. It was the year after Pharaoh Thutmose III officially became king of Egypt. Although, keep in mind, he was only 2 years old during his coronation. Thutmose ruled as a co-regent for the first 22 years of his reign, with his stepmother/aunt Hatshepsut having most of the control over Egypt. That control switched when Thutmose came of age, and he continued ruling until his death at the ripe old age of 56. At least it was ripe old age back then. Historian Richard A. Gabriel once called Thutmose III the Napoleon of Egypt due to his military prowess. Now that the stage is set, let's begin our alien encounter. It starts with Alberto Thule and his visit to Egypt in 1933. While in Cairo, Alberto came across a mysterious papyrus in an antique shop. And by the way, one important thing I forgot to mention is that Alberto was a director of the Egyptian section at the Vatican Museum. He was a connected guy who knew his stuff. So Alberto gets his hands on this mysterious papyrus. Right away, he knew there was something not quite ordinary about it. But it wasn't until Prince Boris de Racheviltz translated the papyrus that the world found out just how unordinary it was. I'm going to read the translation for you now, so listen very carefully. In the 22nd year, in the 3rd month of winter, on the 6th hour of the day, the scribes of the House of Life found a circle of fire in the sky. It had no head and emitted a foul odor from its mouth. It was about 150 feet long. It came toward His Majesty's house, and the people fell upon their bellies. They went and reported the fiery disk to the king, and the king meditated on the events for several days. After days had passed, the fiery disks became even more numerous in the sky. They shined more than the brightness of the sun and extended to the limits of the 4 supports of heaven. Powerful was the position of the fiery disks. The army of the king looked on with His Majesty in their midst. It was after the evening meal when the disks ascended higher into the sky. Fish rained down, the marvel that had never been seen before. Then that's pretty much it. It's a long translation, but it's important to hear the whole thing. Doesn't it kind of sound like an alien invasion hovered above Egypt in 1480 BC? And doesn't it kind of sound like the king wasn't too concerned? There was a host of fiery disks in the sky, and the pharaoh meditated over it for a few days. I don't know what happened, I wasn't there. As much as I wish I had a time machine, I don't. But if the Thule Papyrus is a legitimate document describing real events, it's safe to say the Egyptians were witness to the first known mass UFO sighting. But what do you think was going on here? Let me know in the comments below. Cannibals and Kuru. This chapter of Forbidden History I'm about to tell you might make you lose your lunch, so be warned. There is a culture in the highlands of Papua New Guinea that the world didn't know existed until the 1930s. They remained separated from the rest of civilization until less than a century ago. You are not going to believe what they were doing in the jungle. In the 1930s, Australian gold prospectors began arriving in Papua New Guinea and were surprised to find people. About 1 million people were living in the bush, as if it were the age of the dinosaurs. By the 1950s, researchers had started making their way to the remotest of the remote villages. And there, they found something almost too disturbing for words. Researchers made contact with the Fore tribe, who at first seemed perfectly ordinary for a primitive group of indigenous islanders, but they were not ordinary at all. They were terrifying. There were about 11,000 members of the Fore tribe. It soon became clear that there were some serious health issues in the population. About 200 people a year were dying of an inexplicable illness that outside scientists had never seen before. This illness wasn't something the Australians brought to the Fore tribe. It was already there. the tribe called the disease Kuru. If you've heard of it before, you know exactly where this is going. Kuru is a word that means shivering, which is a pretty good word for the disease. When symptoms set in, demise is unavoidable. First, the victim has issues walking. Then they lose control of their limbs. And then they lose control of their emotions. Within a year, the victim is flailing like a lunatic, they can't get off the floor, and they're laughing hysterically. It's such a bizarre sickness that locals thought it was the result of sorcery. The people hit the hardest were women and young children. In some villages, the young women had been completely wiped out by it. Medical anthropologist Shirley Lindenbaum from City University of New York said the Fore tribe knew that they were on the brink of extinction. But for years, outside scientists couldn't stop the epidemic. They didn't know what was causing it. Scientists kept looking at possible contaminants or something genetic. Then researchers realized it wasn't affecting people in the same genetic group. It was only affecting people in the same social group. It also became apparent that Kuru started in the north and migrated south. Shirley Lindenbaum was on the front lines of this research. She soon realized that the disease was a product of a horrifying funerary ritual in which people ate the dead bodies of their loved ones. It was a tradition that started in the north with maybe a nibble or two. Somebody died, and then they were cooked and eaten by the tribe as an act of love. But why even try it in the first place? They noticed that when a body was put in the ground, it was eaten by worms and insects. When a body was left in the open air on a platform, it was eaten by maggots. Someone decided it would be better if they ate their own people instead of leaving them to be consumed by bugs. As the ritual spread, so did the shivering disease. Soon, the whole tribe was on the edge of disaster. But it wasn't just from eating the bodies. It was from the brain. Women specifically removed the brain, mixed it with ferns, roasted it on a fire, and then ate it. Sometimes they gave pieces to the children as snacks. And this was why Kuru was infecting women and children more than anyone else. And without women, there are no more children. It also wasn't even a virus, or a bacterium, or a parasite, or a fungus. Kuru was an entirely new infectious agent. Scientists now know it's caused by a twisted protein capable of leaving holes in the cerebellum like a kitchen sponge. And now for a quick break because it's shoutout time! I want to give a big thank you to Dorothy Breen and Kiri Aaron for supporting this channel. Be sure to subscribe if you haven't already for more videos about forbidden history. The aliens of the Marquesas Islands. There are strange statues scattered across a series of remote islands in the middle of the South Pacific Ocean that seem to defy explanation. They could be proof of alien interlopers across Polynesia. The islands in question are a cluster of volcanic land masses known as the Marquesas Islands. The biggest of them is Nukuhiva, home to about 8,000 people. Living on an island this small and this removed from the rest of civilization has created a unique community. The culture here is distinct, though their history is partially lost. The stone sculptures carved by the hands of their ancestors hide in the lush jungles of the islands. Nobody remembers exactly where they came from or what they mean. What makes the statues even more exciting is that they don't look entirely human. Yes, they are human-like, but they have notably obscene features. Their eyes are big and bulging like a bug's eyes. Their faces almost look like frog faces with exaggerated, thick mouths. Their arms and legs are normal, but their facial features clearly belong to another race altogether. There is something eerily reptilian or amphibious about the statues. Archaeologists call these statues tiki. It's a broad term used to describe any kind of ancient stone statue or monument across Polynesia. The word itself has a deeper meaning. It originates from the Maori language. The connection I'm about to make will have you rethinking the origin of everything. The Maori have their own version of the Adam story from the Bible. Their Adam is named Tiki. According to the Bible, God created Adam as the first man at the dawn of the universe. Adam was made from the clay of the earth. According to Maori mythology, Hane, the god of forests and birds, son of the Sky Father and Earth Mother, made Tiki as the first man. Tiki was also created with the clay of the earth. Only a bit of god blood was mixed in for good measure. Tiki goes on to discover the first woman, Mariko Riko, bathing in a pond. After a brief seduction, the pair are joined as the first couple ever. They are the Polynesian version of Adam and Eve. The stories are even pretty similar. But what do the tiki statues of the Marquesas Islands have to do with the first man in the world? The answer to that question depends on what you believe. There are those who think that Adam and Eve were aliens, created by the Anunnaki, a race of highly intelligent extraterrestrials. If that's true, maybe tiki was also a creation of alien gods. Maybe the reason the stories are so similar is that they are based on the same thing. The mysterious tiki statues on Nuku-Hiva could be proof of our extraterrestrial origins. Maybe whoever carved these squat, bug-eyed statues had seen the reptilian beings when they stepped off their spaceships. What do you think of these wild stories? Let me know in the comments below. Is this Santa's real bone? Researchers have found a very old document with some unusual connections between Christmas and an obscure English monastery. The medieval document is a list of artifacts and holy relics that were given to Battle Abbey. Trust me when you say you're not going to believe a few of the relics on this list. They are weird. The incredible discovery was recently announced by English Heritage. They are the ones who manage hundreds of historical sites across England, including Battle Abbey in Sussex. During the Middle Ages, Battle Abbey was a thriving monastery. Then, during the Reformation, King Henry VIII's new rules shut it down. The Reformation saw many similar monasteries across the country shuttered and abandoned. 500 years after it was closed, Battle Abbey is barely standing as a roofless ruin. A ruin that has a strange allure for historians, like Dr. Michael Carter. While Michael was translating one of the monastery's surviving documents, he came across the list of holy relics I mentioned in the beginning. These holy relics were each and every one spectacular, and according to Christians 600 years ago, they were also very powerful. Christians believed any holy relic associated with a saint or Christ himself had special powers, supernatural powers. Michael told the BBC that collecting relics was an integral part of medieval monasteries. All over Europe, monasteries were obsessed with collecting the bones and teeth of saints. It was like trying to collect all the Pokemon cards. The list contains 175 items. Many of them were given to Battle Abbey by none other than William the Conqueror himself. There aren't many people more famous for conquering than the guy with Conqueror in his name. The most significant relic on the list is a finger bone. The finger bone was allegedly pried from the cold, dead hand of Saint Nicholas, known to you and me and every kid in the world as jolly old Santa Claus. But what most of the kids out there don't know, and probably aren't too concerned about on Christmas, is that Saint Nick was a real saint from modern-day Turkey. He was the protector of children and gave gifts to less fortunate youth. St. Nicholas's tale of selfless charity is believed to have inspired the legend of Santa Claus that we still celebrate today. His finger bone is a cool relic, right? But it gets cooler. Other gifts include fragments of the manger in which Christ was born in Bethlehem, a piece of the actual manger. There were also several bones of the holy innocents who were killed at the order of King Herod, as is written in the Bible. And there was a rock that was used in the stoning of the Christian martyr Saint Stephen. The massacre of the Holy Innocents was on December 28th. The stoning of St. Stephen was on December 26th. These are all relics that can be traced back to Christmas time. But were they legit? And where are they now? Historians say the relics were either destroyed or lost during King Henry's brutal suppression of the monastery system. For the few artifacts that survive, there are many people who still believe in the power of the sacred relics. The Unfinished Obelisk. Scientists are still trying to solve the mystery of the Unfinished Obelisk. It is one of the biggest and most impressive monoliths ever constructed by the Egyptians. Only there's one problem. They never got it to stand up. The Egyptians were crazy for obelisks. There are about 30 of them that can be found across the world, many stolen by invaders and brought to foreign nations. For example, the Lateran obelisk in Rome, which reaches 150 feet towards the sky. The Unfinished Obelisk is in Aswan, located in southern Egypt near Abu Simbel and the border of modern Sudan. It is considered the heaviest monument ever started by the ancient Egyptians. It's lying in the exact same quarry where workers first started to shape it 3,500 years ago.
It stretches 137 feet across the ground and weighs an estimated 1,168 tons. The Unfinished Obelisk was commissioned by Queen Hatshepsut herself around 1473 BC.
Wait, that was right around the same time the Thule Papyrus recorded a mass sighting of fiery discs in the sky. Could these two things be connected?
The biggest single monument ever was carved in the same decade that the sky glowed with strange metal discs. It does seem a little suspicious.
Yet the Egyptians could never pull it off. They just couldn't get the obelisk upright. What if they had gotten it upright? How are they going to move it? Scientists think they would have used ropes and pulleys, obviously.
But unless they were moving at 5 feet, ropes and pulleys wouldn't have been enough. This giant obelisk would have dwarfed all other Egyptian monuments if it had ever been finished. During construction, something went wrong, and there are huge cracks running up the stone, so it became useless. The question is, what were the Egyptians thinking?
This giant chunk of granite would have been a huge feat of engineering to even move off the ground, let alone stand upright.
The Mad Russian Historian. You've seen mad scientists on TV and movies, but did you know there are real mad scientists out there? Russian police recently discovered 29 mummies being kept in the home of a crazy historian. I don't know if this counts as forbidden history, but you're going to want every last gruesome detail, I'm sure. 29 mummies? That's more mummies than you'll find in most Egyptian tombs. It must have been hard work getting all of those corpses back to his apartment. The historian dug them up from cemeteries and then dressed them in clothing that he found in graves. The historian lived in the city of Nizhny Novgorod near the Volga River. A police video was released showing the inside of his apartment. It was like finding Jeffrey Dahmer's apartments, only if he'd never been caught. There were hands and faces bundled in headscarves, with mummies dressed up like dolls in bright dresses. Russian media identified the historian as Anatoly Moskvin, 45 years old. He was an expert on the local dead. He used to know all of the cemeteries in the region and would study gravestones to uncover the lives of those buried. These weren't particularly ancient mummies, but still each of them was a person with their own unique story and background. Somewhere during his research, Anatoly went mad. His honest curiosity transformed into something horrific. I feel like I'm describing a supervillain's origin story. Anatoly went from historian to grave robber and then to corpse collector. The one thing I didn't mention yet was that all of the 29 stolen bodies were women. The historian had a type: tall, pale, and dead. This is no laughing matter, though. The historian was arrested after an investigation into the desecration of several graves at cemeteries spread across the region. They finally captured him at a cemetery with a bag full of bones. Anatoly was a linguistic expert, a specialist in Celtic culture, and was fairly fluent in 13 languages. He'd also inspected more than 752 cemeteries throughout his work as a historian. He told the police that he also had an interest in, can you guess? The occult. Nobody knows what kinds of rituals he may have been performing with the mummies, but he definitely took things a little too far. The Nazi Death Beam. Doom from above. It's scary to think that Nazi Germany could have gotten their hands on the atomic bomb before they lost the war. What's even scarier is an obscure piece of history involving the Nazis, a death ray, and total obliteration. The Nazis almost figured out how to harness the power of the sun to create an orbiting space beam weapon. This insane research project was undertaken in the German town of Hillersleben throughout World War II. At a huge facility sheltered by the thick forest, 150 engineers and physicists worked tirelessly on a new weapon. Well, on a few different weapons. Many of them were totally crazy. They were the kinds of weapons you'd expect to find in the laboratory of Lex Luthor or some other evil genius. In May 1945, the war was over, and the scientists at Hillersleben had nothing left to do. They abandoned their doomsday devices, each one at a different stage of completion. There were rocket-assisted artillery cannons that had 50% better range than normal artillery. The scientists had been in the midst of developing a 600mm mortar shell that could be fired almost 4 miles. They had a partially developed Tiger tank that could fire 760-pound rockets. Next to the rockets and tanks was a behemoth of a weapon called the Sonnengewehr. In English, that translates as the sun gun. It was an orbital weapon designed to incinerate the people whom the Nazis deemed less than human. The design was based on a weapon conceived much earlier by Hermann Oberth, one of the greatest physicists of the early 20th century. Hermann believed that a hypothetical manned space station could be placed in orbit. On that space station could be a huge mirror that would concentrate the light of the sun, beaming it down to Earth. If you've ever taken a magnifying glass and concentrated sunlight to start a fire, you know what I'm talking about. Only the Nazi sun gun would have been thousands of times larger than your magnifying glass. The beam would have been colossal, a heat ray that could destroy a city as quickly as God destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah. The even crazier part is that Hermann Oberth wasn't the first scientist to harness the power of the sun into a death ray. Archimedes did it in 212 BC. When the Roman Republic attacked the city of Syracuse, the Greeks repelled their invasion by using huge mirrors to set their ships on fire. Sure, this was busted on Mythbusters in 2006. Not even their big brains could recreate Archimedes' metal mirrors to ignite a wooden boat, but the scientific principle behind the myth is sound. Maybe Mythbusters just needed bigger mirrors. Using Hermann's 1929 design, the Nazis would have created a mirror about 100,000 times bigger than the one Archimedes had 2,200 years ago. Of course, the war ended before the Nazis could ever get anywhere near completion. We aren't out of the woods yet. With how fast technology is advancing, let's hope nobody else tries to make an orbital space beam. The Doxy Pool and Jenny Greenteeth. Have you ever heard of Jenny Greenteeth before? She's also sometimes called Wicked Jenny, or just Grinteeth. She is a mythical figure in English folklore, a sort of river hag or an evil mermaid. According to legend, she had a penchant for drowning children and the elderly. Way to pick on the most vulnerable, Jenny. The reason I want to talk about this river hag is that she might have been real, and may have even been part of a race of freakish mermaid-like fiends that lived across the world. The story of Jenny Greenteeth is nearly identical to the Rusalka monster in Slavic lore or the Kappa in Japanese mythology. There's also the Bunyip from Australia and the River Mama in Jamaica. The Storm Hag is my personal favorite of the river hags. She appears in American folklore around the Lake Erie region. The Storm Hag is said to have green, slimy skin and teeth like that of a shark. She lives at the bottom of the lake and sings a song to try and lure sailors when they approach, just like a siren from Greek myth. Getting back to Jenny, let's check out a place called the Doxy Pool. It's a small pool in Staffordshire, England, with a history steeped in mystery and legend. The pool does look mythical, with the landscape crushed under the perpetually blue clouds of rainy England. Some say the pool is bottomless. It supposedly connects to another deep pool nearby called Blake Mere by an underground passageway. Both Blake Mere and Doxy Pool are believed to house the evil mermaid named Jenny Greenteeth. Some have even seen her. In 1949, local eyewitness Florence Pettit came forward saying that she had seen a slimy blue nymph emerge from the water right before she went for a swim. Florence was so scared she ran away. While most people say that Florence saw a figment of her imagination, maybe she didn't. Maybe there are magical nymphs in this world, and maybe they've been here a lot longer than human beings. What do you think about this mythical story? Could this have been based on reality? Let me know in the comments. Jesus wasn't born on Christmas. You have been lied to about Christmas your whole life. I know it's the middle of summer and I've already mentioned Christmas once today, but hear me out. Maybe a little Christmas cheer is just what you need. I'll come right out and say it. Jesus Christ was not born on December 25th like the church says he was. They have been lying to everyone for more than 1,000 years. If you were to ask the average Christian when Jesus was born, they'd probably say December 25th in the year 1 AD. And that's why BC stands for before Christ, and some people think AD stands for after death. But it's actually Anno Domini, which means in the year of our Lord. That's a fun fact to take home with you. But scholars aren't convinced. Researchers are saying that Christmas has nothing to do with Jesus. December 25th was stolen by the Catholic Church. The church ripped off the festival of Saturnalia from the pagan Romans. What hasn't the church ripped off from an older religion at this point? Saturnalia was a festival celebrating the winter solstice, dedicated to the god Saturn. Scholar Ignacio L. Gotz said the church piggybacked off the popular pagan festival to make their winter celebration more popular. That's pretty sneaky, but not a bad idea. Have your party on the day of your neighbor's party, and then see which party more people go to. But if the church has been lying all this time about Jesus' birth, when was it really? Jesus Christ may have been born in the year 6 BC, but don't go changing your calendars just yet. This is based on the biblical story of King Herod. Herod the Great, to be exact. The Bible tells us he tried to kill Jesus by ordering the death of all male infants under the age of 2 in Bethlehem. But there isn't any proof that Herod killed all the babies, nor is there any proof that Jesus was ever born. Some scholars have tried to connect the Star of Bethlehem to a real astronomical event to pinpoint his birth year. Astronomer Colin Humphreys suggested the Star of Bethlehem in the Bible was a comet, which was observed by Chinese astronomers in 5 BC. Ignacio L. Gotz said that Jesus was likely born in the late spring for one simple reason. 2,000 years ago, pregnancies typically began in the fall after the harvest was taken in, and this was when families would gather enough money for a wedding feast, which led to the unification of man and wife. Another possibility is that Jesus was born during a rare event in which Saturn and Jupiter were close in the sky, creating the illusion of the Star of Bethlehem. This happened in October of 7 BC. Then again, there was a similar event involving Venus and Jupiter in June of 2 BC. It looks like Jesus could have either been a Libra or a Gemini. The strange case of the Mowing Devil. Crop circles have been freaking people out since at least the 17th century. There's a surviving pamphlet from August of 1678 describing a farmer who woke up to find his crops cut down by the devil. This event is known as the Mowing Devil, and it might just be the first published account of aliens messing with oats. You can see the pamphlet for yourself on the British Library's website. It states that a farmer found a field of oats mowed so neatly that it must have been the devil or an infernal spirit. No mortal man would have been able to do anything like it. The oats laid in the field perfectly flat, and the farmer was too afraid to move them. In the night, the farmer had seen strange lights coming from the field as if it were on fire. Could that light have been from the spaceship pushing down the oats into a baseline pattern of geometric signs? Crop circle researcher Jim Schnabel doesn't think so. Jim said the oat stalks were cut, not bent like modern crop circles. The sad part is that there are no aerial images of what the field looked like from above. Nobody will ever know if it was a crop circle because nobody saw it from the sky. But in any case, I don't know about you, but I don't think a demon is going to be helping you mow your lawn perfectly. What do you think? The truth behind pyramid power. After more than 10 years of research, a Spanish architect believes he has reconstructed the original appearance of the Great Pyramid of Giza. What he discovered on top of the pyramid is blowing people's minds. His name is Miguel Pérez Sánchez. Using a sophisticated computer model, Miguel claims to have discovered that there was a spear at the top of the pyramid more than 6 feet in diameter. It was basically a huge metal ball. The pyramid was constructed around 2550 BC during the reign of Pharaoh Khufu. He was the second ruler of the 4th dynasty. What many people don't realize is that when the pyramid was initially completed, it had a coating of white limestone covering it. The pyramid looked like a Toblerone bar of pure white chocolate. It was also significantly taller. Researchers believe the pyramid has lost almost 30 feet over the years. People have speculated over what may have adorned the pyramid, but no one has ever come up with an answer that hasn't been disputed. Some think it was a giant chair, a throne for a god, but Pérez Sánchez says it was a spear. This spear may have been the secret ingredient that transformed the Great Pyramid from a mortuary temple into a power plant. Its purpose may have been much greater than being a glorified coffin for a pharaoh. Have you ever heard the term pyramid power before? Pyramids are supposedly magical structures that have extra special characteristics. In the 1930s, French researcher Antoine Bovis came up with the idea that pyramids could preserve organic material for a really long time. His idea came when he visited the Great Pyramid in Egypt and saw a garbage can. It had been put inside the king's chamber and was filled with dead animals. It's pretty gross, and most people wouldn't have looked at it so long. But Antoine noticed something strange. The dead animals weren't decaying. They had accidentally wandered into the pyramid and died, but they weren't undergoing the same decomposition as if they had died outside. Antoine realized the pyramid was somehow stopping the natural process of rot. It was preserving the dead as if they'd been put in a freezer. The idea of pyramid power evolved from here. These days, plenty of people believe that being inside a pyramid is like being inside a magic bubble, one that can induce creativity, improve health, and trigger intense urges. There is a whole science around this now known as pyramidology. What do you think is really going on inside the pyramids? Let me know your thoughts in the comments, and thanks for watching!
Be sure to stay tuned for extra content you might have missed. The alien gods of Egypt. Aliens have invaded ancient history wherever you go. Ancient Egypt, as we think of it, began about 5,000 years ago, and it is hard for many to believe that people were so advanced during that time. At ancient sites, archaeologists have found ramp systems, post holes, and inscriptions detailing how the ancient pharaohs built their impressive structures. Ancient Egypt was one of the most advanced societies on the planet, but how did they move such heavy blocks such long distances, and why did they worship such strange gods? The more exciting fringe theory is that it was because they had help from aliens. Since the late 19th century, this theory has gained traction when science fiction authors started including it in their work. Every ancient society worshipped some kind of pantheon of mysterious gods, from the Assyrians worshipping the Anunnaki to the Greeks worshipping the gods of Mount Olympus. But the Egyptian deities were slightly more extraterrestrial than the others. The show Ancient Aliens has greatly helped make this theory more popular. As Rice Thomas pointed out in a Vice article, when the mystery is as big as the Great Pyramid of Giza, which has been around for thousands of years and is still standing, it's easy to see why. There is also the case of the famous pharaoh Akhenaten from the 14th century BC. He is depicted with large eyes, an enormous cone skull, skinny arms and legs, and an odd protruding tummy. His appearance has made many question if he actually was an alien. It appears as though Pharaoh Akhenaten had a genetic mutation which caused his brain to grow far larger than normal, and for some strange reason, he got rid of all the Egyptian gods and declared there was only one. Many other pharaohs and members of the royal family appear to have long, elongated skulls and large eyes, probably from cranial deformation, but to some, they are proof of visitors from another world. The Knights Templar and Friday the 13th. If you ever wondered why Friday the 13th is such a terrifying day, it actually goes back thousands and thousands of years. In fact, there is a hidden truth behind the Friday the 13th phenomenon that has to do with an ancient legal document, the Sumerians, and the Knights Templar. One theory is that the Code of Hammurabi, which is considered to be the oldest legal document in the world, superstitiously omitted the 13th rule from its list, starting the trend over 2,000 years before today. Others say the paranoia around the 13th comes from the Sumerians, who thought the number 12 was perfect and the number 13 was evil. But by far the most interesting theory, perhaps, has to do with the Knights Templar and their destruction. It was in 1118 that they began life as a monastic military order. Their first task was to protect pilgrims who traveled to the Holy Land, but they quickly became one of the most influential groups of the Middle Ages. They grew very rich after the Crusades and had their own castles, churches, and established their own banks. Their downfall came early in the morning on Friday, October 13th, 1307. Around 600 Templars were arrested. They were charged with heresy and devil worship. Pretty much all of them were brutally tortured or burned by medieval inquisitors. It is said that the very date of the destruction of the Knights Templar has stuck in human memory ever since, transformed into the evilest day on the calendar. The Nazca Lines of Kazakhstan. You are probably already familiar with the Nazca Lines, but what a lot of people don't know is that across the entire globe, from South America to Central Asia, there is a group of giant geoglyphs almost exactly like the ones in Peru. These are the Kazakhstan Geoglyphs, and over 50 of them have been discovered in northern Kazakhstan thanks to satellite images. Nobody is exactly sure what these geoglyphs mean, although some of the shapes have proved to be pretty disturbing. For example, researchers have identified a massive swastika scraped into the ground. It seems to be nearly 1,300 feet in diameter, and it's accompanied by plenty of other geometric shapes, things like crosses, rings, and squares. Some of these geoglyphs are bigger than modern aircraft carriers. The swastika pattern may sound bad, but it's not what you think. These symbols were actually used in ancient times as a symbol of peace and balance. It's also a little different than the one from the 30s. However, we're not really sure how old the symbols are here. They were definitely left behind by an ancient society, probably thousands of years ago, but nobody has come up with an exact date. We also don't know why they were made. The symbols could have been markers where rituals took place. They may have been used to mark ownership of the land. It's completely up in the air, and researchers are stumped. The Pyramid of Argentina. Cono de Arita is the Great Pyramid of Argentina, depending on who you ask. This large sandy triangle is situated in the middle of an inhospitable wasteland, a place called Salar de Arizaro. The pyramid stands over 400 feet above the sea of salt. The only way to reach the pyramid is by descending through the high Andes, crossing the deadly salt flats to reach the end of the world in this Patagonian landscape. The mystery with the pyramid is that nobody can say for sure if this was ever actually a real pyramid or if it's just a natural geological formation. Scientists say it's nothing but a volcano sitting dormant on the salt flats. However, others say this was indeed a pyramid constructed by some kind of ancient civilization that lived in this part of Argentina thousands of years before the Inca ever ruled Peru in the north. And while there isn't actually any archaeological evidence to suggest an unknown race of people really did live here, it's not impossible. Even if Cono de Arita is nothing but a pyramid-shaped mound of sand, it still may have been the epicenter for ceremonial activities in the region. It's the most striking geological feature for thousands of miles in any direction. Any society who learned of its whereabouts would surely have made pilgrimages here to be closer to the gods. It's just that all traces of potential human activity have been wiped away by the desert sands and the thousands of years. And now for number 6, but first it's shout-out time! Big thank you to Kaiser Soze and Jessica Tyree, who is a longtime subscriber. Be sure to subscribe if you haven't already to join the Origins Explained family. Persecuting weevils. In the 16th century, an insect was put on trial. In the year 1545, a group of winemakers from a small village in the Rhone Alps in France did something that's very hard to believe. They took some bugs to court. They placed a complaint through a legal representative that a species of weevil was destroying their vineyards. A weevil is a type of insect that you may have spotted in your flour or rice. Many of them have long snouts and they love to eat people's food. But they actually are not that harmful. Not that anyone knew that in the 16th century. The winemakers needed somebody to blame for the damage to their crops. Thankfully for the weevils, the court refused to pass any kind of sentence on them and instead issued a proclamation the following year in 1546 that the winemakers say a public prayer. This was the theologically appropriate outcome to the trial, rather than hunting down and killing all the weevils. But the courts didn't finish up that quickly. They went and dragged the entire town into the situation. In order to serve some divine vengeance against the weevils, the entire town was ordered to repent for their sins, pay their tithes, celebrate 3 high masses, and then to march in solidarity around the vineyards as if the weevils were some sort of plague sent by God. After all, it was the townspeople's sins in the first place that led to this evil. The public was a little surprised at this judgment since they already considered themselves to be church-going citizens. Later on, the weevils were taken to trial again, and this time they were excommunicated in exchange for receiving a piece of land. It's unclear whether they accepted the deal. Why was the church taking these cases in the first place? It's hard to say. Buried alive. A terrifying revelation has been made thanks to some bizarre burials found in a group of Chinese tombs. These tombs date back 3,000 years and belong to a wealthy clan from the Shang dynasty. The complex of tombs was uncovered at the ancient city of Anyang in China's Henan province. There are ruins here from one of the first major cities that ever sprang up in China, called Yin. It was the capital from around 1600 BC until 1046 BC. But the real forbidden history comes from what's under the city, in the 24 extravagant graves that have just been excavated. The graves held the remains of warriors and war horses, humans and animals that appear to have been sacrificed at the funerals of their wealthy patrons. It seems like they may have been buried alive to accompany the richest dead people in society into the afterlife. Inside the tombs, there were war chariots, the remains of the horses that pulled them, and warriors dressed in fancy clothes. Some of the warriors were found wearing hats which had been decorated with strings of shells. The foreheads of the horses had been covered in gold veneer. Everything looked like it had been part of some great ceremony for the dead. According to Kong Deming, the director of the local Institute of Cultural Relics, this is a very rare discovery in the ancient city. The ritualistic killing of the servants and warriors shows just how incredibly powerful the masters were and how they lorded over society. Ignoring the Torah. A new study of ancient fish bones has proven that Judeans didn't always take the Torah quite as seriously as most people may have thought. In fact, Jewish people of ancient Israel may have completely ignored the Torah and ate non-kosher fish, even though it was prohibited. Researchers recently looked at fish bones found at 30 different archaeological sites across Israel and Sinai. These bones date back over 2,000 years and cover a period of time from the Late Bronze Age to the Byzantine period. The overwhelming evidence shows that Judeans ate pretty much all the fish they wanted, even though the Torah prohibited them from eating finless and scaleless fish. The issue here is that the Torah was written at a lot of different times. The writing of this text started way before the destruction of Jerusalem, probably around 586 BC, and writing continued all the way up until the more modern times of Hellenistic Greece. There are two passages which forbid eating any kind of species of fish that lacks scales or fins, but it never really says why. This rule probably came about because of something that was happening in society over 2,500 years ago, but has been lost to time. Archaeological evidence shows that Judeans continued to eat whatever kind of fish they wanted anyway, right up until the Roman era, when non-kosher fish bones suddenly became absent from all Judean settlements. Even though the rule was around for hundreds of years before, the Judeans never really bothered with it. Not until the Romans came around, and nobody has any idea why. Jack the Giant Killer. The tale of Jack and the Beanstalk is significantly older than most people realize, and actually has ties to a legend of giants that may have lived thousands of years ago. The English fairy tale we're familiar with these days, the one with the giant that goes fee, fi, fo, fum, is an alteration of an 18th century story about Jack the Giant Killer, and the origins of that story can be traced through the oral histories of prehistoric England, way beyond modern times, to thousands of years ago when a race of giants allegedly occupied the British Isles. According to Raphael Holinshed, who wrote a 16th century chronicle of England, Scotland, and Ireland, Britain's oldest name on record is Albion. That name can be traced to a prehistoric king who ruled a race of giants over 5,000 years ago. It sounds strange, but it might be more rooted in reality than most people want to believe. Marco Polo wrote that he encountered giants when he traveled to Zanzibar. The Bible is filled with stories of Middle Eastern giants. The journalist Glenn D. Kittler allegedly encountered men who were 8 feet tall when he journeyed deep into the Congo in the 20th century. These kinds of accounts come from all over the world since the beginning of time. These giants may have actually come from a very distinct subspecies of Homo sapiens. This is based on a skeleton that was discovered in a Siberian cave over a decade ago. This skeleton, a unique kind of humanoid called a Denisovan, lived 50,000 years ago and was way taller than other man-like species. It's possible that the descendants of these extremely tall, primitive people could have wandered all the way into North America, then slowly went extinct. The Thule Papyrus. The Thule Papyrus is an ancient Egyptian document from the rule of Thutmose III. The ancient papyrus first gained notoriety in 1953, when Tiffany Thayer wrote of the artifact in Fortean Society magazine. The papyrus was supposedly discovered among the loose papers of a deceased Vatican Museum director by the name of Alberto Thule. Within the papyrus is the description of a UFO sighting from thousands of years ago. The document supposedly goes into great description about circles of fire and giant red discs that came out of the sky. But nobody knows if this document is actually real. This is one of the most controversial ancient Egyptian documents that's out there. The first issue is that nobody believes the translation. Pretty much all mainstream scientists have called this thing a hoax and pure nonsense. The papyrus almost definitely exists, it's just the translation that's controversial. But if it's true, as it very well could be, that makes the document the oldest known confirmation of an alien visitor to our planet. Ancient secrets. When people wanted to pass secrets along in the olden days, they didn't have coded text messages and secret folders to hide their stuff. Instead, they used a very sneaky technique called letter locking to keep all their forbidden text hidden from prying eyes. Sending letters centuries ago was quite an affair. A piece of paper didn't go into an envelope and get dumped into a postal receptacle. Instead, they just used letter locking. This was the process of making extremely specific folds and cuts in a piece of paper so that it would seal itself shut. It was almost like medieval origami, something anyone could do to protect their darkest secrets. When a letter was sent that was locked together using its own folds and flaps, there was no way somebody could sneak a peek. Not unless they undid all the folds, which would leave obvious evidence of tampering. And back then, no mail delivery person would dare do such a thing because it would ruin their reputation, and they would never get work again. This earliest form of encryption probably began in the 1200s in Europe and continued to be used to keep documents, love letters, and death threats safe, up until it started falling out of favor in the 18th century. Thanks for watching! What's your favorite piece of weird history? Let me know in the comments below, and be sure to subscribe if you haven't already. See you soon! Bye!